Welcome, everybody, to Law and Crime Daily. I'm Jesse Weber. Alec Murdaugh, the disgraced lawyer convicted of killing his wife Maggie and son Paul, is starting a new week in prison and staring down 2 life sentences. Here's a look at Murdaugh's latest mugshot taken after he was sentenced on Friday. Now, shaving an inmate's head, it might look strange. It's actually protocol. It's done there to prevent lice. Murdaugh went to a facility where he's going to be evaluated and eventually assigned to a maximum security South Carolina prison. A juror from Alec Murdaugh's trial is talking about the guilty verdict and the evidence that he saw over 6 long weeks. Law and Crime's Anjanette Levy has the story.
During the trial, James was known only as Juror 530. Now, in his first television interview following the verdict, he is talking about the evidence that stood out most to him during that 6-week trial.
I think that it's true that he did love his family.
James is a 22-year-old construction manager and is about the same age as Paul Murdaugh would be if he were alive today. James said that all of the evidence was important, but one thing stood out: that kennel video.
Hey, Bubba.
I think it's a very crucial piece, and I think that it's incredible timing as to when they were able to get it, and I think it's incredible timing on Paul's part. I don't think that anyone would have ever known that he was down there if it wasn't for that video. I think that there's a lot of evidence that points towards Alex, but I feel like that does solidify it.
Also important, Murdaugh's own words about the deaths of Paul and Maggie Murdaugh on the stand.
Mr. Griffin, I didn't shoot my wife or my son anytime, ever.
I think that part of the way that he is able to be so good at talking to people is that he's convincing. And I think that whenever he's convincing himself as well. And I think he's able to do that because he often meshes the truth with a lie.
The jurors' initial vote, 9 guilty, 3 not sure. James said the jurors were able to move through questions about evidence quickly because they wrote down questions in the jury room during breaks, since they were not allowed to take notes. James's brother is a Colleton County Sheriff's deputy who actually responded to Moselle the night of the murders. James says that the defense was aware of this fact and approved of him being on the jury. For Law and Crime Daily, I'm Anjanette Levy.
James isn't the only person intimately involved in this trial to speak to the media. You see, one of Murdaugh's own lawyers appeared on News Nation. Jim Griffin worked very closely with Dick Harpootlian, often cross-examining some witnesses, walking others through evidence. He also delivered the closing argument for the defense. Griffin says that the defense plans to appeal the verdict on the grounds that the financial crimes evidence should never have been allowed in. They maintain it was way too prejudicial. During a segment on News Nation, Chris Cuomo asked Griffin who they thought was behind the killings if Murdaugh didn't do it.
Certainly, if we had proof of who did it, we would come forward with it. So we did not have any credible evidence of other people who may have committed these murders. I mean, the reason we didn't have it is because the state really didn't look beyond Alec, other than the individuals that were directly involved in the voting accident, which, you know, frankly, Alec told him that night. I don't believe it was the individuals directly involved in the voting accident. At the time, he thought that it was some deranged person who heard or viewed or was in contact with all this negative chatter about Paul not getting justice because he's a privileged kid, and that took it upon himself. Whether that is ultimately what occurred or not, I mean, we just didn't have the information to go there. We don't have the power of subpoena. We don't have the power of search warrants. We can't subpoena cell phone records. And so we were limited.
All right, I'm joined by my co-host and legal analyst, defense attorney Brian Buckmeyer, former trial attorney Terry Austin. Terry, several jurors, they're speaking out. I feel like there might be a risk, right, that the jury revealing all this, couldn't that help Alec Murdaugh in an appeal?
Absolutely, it can help him in an appeal. You know, there are different grounds for appeal. You talked about one of them, the financial crimes, legal error getting into the case. But jury misconduct is also a large area where you can have an appeal if they are forced to make a decision and it wasn't something they really wanted to do, if they spoke to someone outside the parameters of that trial. And we had something like that happen here, and that juror was dismissed. And, you know, you can also have a juror who is, you know, just not in a position to make that decision. And I think if any of these jurors who come out and say that they were forced or in any way, shape, or form, they looked at evidence outside of the trial, it could be a grounds for appeal.
Well, talking about appeals, Brian, any other avenues that the defense may explore that we haven't thought of yet?
Yeah, Jesse, one thing that kind of sticks out to me that I don't know whether or not it would win is this writing questions in between the breaks. They're not allowed to take notes. To Terry's point, we would have never known that they were taking questions down during the break. For me, you, Terry, I, even the producers write our questions here, and to write a question, you have to consider the information in which you're asking the question about. Well, what's another way of saying deliberation? Well, a long form of consideration. So how do you write the questions without considering the facts? And if you're not allowed to consider the facts until the case is given to you, aren't you not following the judge's rules right there? I mean, that could potentially be a reason for appeal. I've never seen it argued before, but it kind of makes sense.
Well, I'll tell you what. So this is still the murder case, right? But still ahead on Law and Crime Daily. What's next for convicted killer Alec Murdaugh? We're digging into other cases that Murdaugh is connected to and what'll happen now that the disgraced attorney is behind bars. Our coverage on what's next for Alec Murdaugh continues now. The disgraced lawyer may be in prison and likely to stay there, but the murder trial wasn't the only legal trouble he's facing. In this segment, we're going to take a look at where the financial crimes stand, what's next for the lawsuit connected to the boat wreck, and whether the death of Gloria Satterfield, the Murdaugh's longtime housekeeper, is going to be investigated further. So let's dive right in. First up, Alec Murdaugh, he still faces 99 financial crimes charges. Prosecutors say he stole at least $8 million in settlement money from clients at his law firm. The state said that those charges were Murdaugh's motive for killing his wife and son because he wanted to distract from his financial misdeeds. In fact, when he took the stand during the criminal trial, Murdaugh repeatedly confessed to stealing money from his clients.
I admit candidly in all of these cases, Mr. Waters, that I took money that was not mine and I shouldn't have done it. I hate the fact that I did it. I'm embarrassed by it. I'm embarrassed for my son. I'm embarrassed for my family. And I don't dispute that I did it.
Over now to the next legal issue. In 2019, 2 years before being murdered, Paul Murdaugh was involved in a boat crash on a South Carolina river. It's believed that Paul was driving the boat drunk when it hit a bridge pylon. 6 young people, all under 21, were on the boat at the time, and one woman, Mallory Beach, did not resurface after the crash, and her body was found a week later. Paul was indicted on 3 counts of boating under the influence, but was murdered before the case went to trial. Mallory Beach's mother and family members of other people on the boat sued the Murdaughs. In January of this year, a judge approved a settlement between Beach's family and 2 of the Murdaugh family members. Mark Tensley, the man who represented Beach's mother, testified about the case during the Alec Murdaugh's double murder trial.
I recognize that the case against Alec, if he were a victim of some vigilante, would in fact be over.
It would be over.
It would be over. When you're asking for a money judgment, people have to be motivated to give you that money judgment. If Alec had been victimized by a vigilante, nobody would have brought a verdict back against Alec.
And finally, South Carolina law enforcement investigators are also looking into the death of Gloria Satterfield, the Murdaugh's longtime housekeeper. Satterfield died in 2018 after allegedly tripping over the family's dogs and falling down the stairs at Moselle. Maggie and Paul were the only witnesses. SLED agents want to exhume Satterfield's body and see if they can identify a more conclusive cause of death. An autopsy hadn't been done. At Satterfield's funeral, her son Tony says Murdaugh approached him about filing a lawsuit so that insurance would approve a multi-million-dollar payout. Eventually, after the murders, an attorney for the Satterfields was able to get some of that money. But prior to that, Tony Satterfield says he didn't know about the payout that had already been given to Alec Murdaugh.
Did he ever tell you about a $505,000 settlement that already had occurred?
No.
Did the defendant ever tell you that he also had a $5 million umbrella policy?
No.
Did he ever tell you that there had been a recovery against that?
No.
Did he ever tell you that there had been a recovery for $3.8 million against that?
No.
Did he ever pay you 1 penny of $3.8 million?
No.
Brian, how bad does it look for Alec Murdaugh in these other open cases?
Jesse, it looks very, very, very bad. Starting off with the financial crimes, he's already testified to committing at least some of these crimes. The only question is which one of the 19 indictment and 99 charges is he agreeing to and that he's not. He's facing potential centuries in jail for those combined charges. And so I think it's also the prosecution's motive, or probably it should be their motive, to try to get that charge solidified as best as possible. When it comes to the financial crimes, that taking from the Satterfield's family, or even the 2021 attempted suicide on his life, he's already committed to those. He's already said that he did them all. It's just a matter of how many years in jail are going to tag on to that in the murders.
Think about what Brian said, centuries in prison. Terry, let's go to the Gloria Satterfield case, the death of her. How difficult is it to investigate cases years after the fact?
It's going to be very difficult here. They are exhuming Gloria Satterfield's body, and that alone tells you something. There's going to be decomposition, obviously. Physical evidence that might have been available back in 2018, probably not available now. You're going to have witnesses who might not be available, or their memories might have faded. So it's going to be overall much more difficult for the prosecution to pursue this case. But they have to do the investigation, and if it turns out there's something that is not straight, they're going to pursue and try to figure out whether or not there is a motive for a murder versus an accident. And it could be Maggie and Paul were witnesses. It could be Alec Murdaugh wanted to get money from the insurance. It could be he wanted to cover up something she might have found. All of these are speculation and things that people are reporting and why they are investigating that crime.
Well, I think we can all agree, even though he was convicted, the Alec Murdaugh story saga will continue in a lot of different realms.